Hello, fellow podcasters. I'm Dan Benjamin, and welcome to the channel. Today, I'm going to be teaching you about compression. That's right, compression. This is probably the number one thing that I get asked about and have been asked about since I started podcasting back in 2006. Everybody wants to understand compression, and there's good reason. Compression is one of the most powerful tools that you as an audio engineer, as a podcaster, have in your arsenal. It is an important effect. It is an important filter, but you've got to understand it. And I hear so often people applying way too much compression, not really understanding what it's good for, how it should be used, when it should be used. And those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today. And by the time that we're done, you're going to understand compression. You're going to know exactly how to use it. And there are a lot of weird, mysterious things about it. What is a knee, a hard knee, a soft knee, a ratio, a threshold? We're going to figure all that out. We're going to talk all about it. Now, I want to mention that I do use Logic Pro 10 to do audio editing myself. So that's what I'm going to be using to show y'all how it's done. But compression is compression. It doesn't matter whether you're using Logic Pro like me or GarageBand or even Adobe Premiere, which is what I use to edit these videos. It has a compression filter that you can apply. Everything has a compression filter if it's any kind of serious audio tool. So it doesn't matter whether you're Mac, PC, Pro Tools, Logic, irrelevant. The compression is going to work the same. And I will explain to you the differences in filter settings so that you can keep in mind, for example, there's something called makeup gain that might not be in every compression filter. That doesn't matter. I'll explain it all in this video. So you've come to the right place if you want to understand compression and how you can use it for yourself, for your co-host, for your guests. It's all going to happen here. I'm building this video up because it's something I've really wanted to teach for a long time, and I'm excited to do it. But before we dive in, I do want to mention, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me know that you're out there. And don't forget to hit the bell too. That'll let you know when I come out with a new video, and that's very important too. Please also consider leaving your feedback, questions, comments, suggestions in the comments below. I need to hear those, and I try to answer all of them. It means a lot to me, and it helps me determine what the next video that I make should be. So I appreciate everybody who has already liked and subscribed and who has left comments. But if you haven't, please do it. It helps me. It helps make the channel better, and I'm here to help y'all. So do that. And the last thing I'll mention, the audio clip that I'm going to be using when I demo these different compression settings is a recording I made. I happen to have it memorized. It's one of my favorite movies, 1986 movie The Fly with Jeff Goldblum in it. There's a little quote that I record that I'm going to be using because there are a lot of highs and lows, and there's discussion in it. It works really well to show what compression can do. So the link for that audio, the original audio, is going to be below. You can download that and use it to, if you want to follow along with what I'm doing and try making the compression yourself to see if you wind up with the same results. So there's going to be two audio tracks below, the original and then my version of the compression. And you can see if you arrive at the same settings as the ones that I've used. So without further ado, let's get started. So here we are in Logic Pro 10, and I have loaded in that sample file that I was telling you about, which is, again, just me reading a quote from the movie The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. It's a favorite of mine. And so I recorded some audio here, a little clip of a monologue that he delivers. And let's say this is our sample audio that we want to add some compression to. Like I said, you're going to be able to download this audio yourself in the notes here below the video. So you can do that and you can play along at home, or you can try this out later if you want. But let me just play this audio as it stands right now. There are no effects on it. It's just a straight audio from my microphone into the preamp into the computer. So here, I'll just play a few seconds of it. So I asked the computer if it had improved me, and it said it didn't know what I was talking about. And that's made me think very carefully about what I've been feeling and why. And I'm beginning to think that the sheer process. Now, there's a few things that I want to point out. As you may have noticed, the meters that are down here, I think they were reading about, you can see the peak. The loudest it got was minus 15. As a general rule of thumb, you kind of want it to get, and this is another question I get asked a lot, is what should the output volume be anywhere between -6 and -3 on the output level, I generally shoot for -3. That is considered broadcast volume, and that's what you should be choosing for all of your tracks as well as the total of all of the tracks. So as I play this, being taken apart, atom by atom, and put back together again, I'm wanting to see it hit somewhere in this -6 to -3, depending on how loud you like your podcasts to be. So that's another thing that you can look at. Compression is what's going to help us get to that -6, -3 that we're shooting for. Again, I'm going to shoot for -3 for this example. Now, anyone who knows anything about audio is saying, oh yeah, they need some compression on that. Well, why do you know that? Because there are a lot of peaks and valleys, especially if I take us out to the end here where I'm more excited at this more exciting part of the monologue. It makes a man a king. For the moment I walked out of the pod, I felt like $1,000,000. You know, I think I'm going to have a cannoli after all. Waiter, but what an accomplishment. Okay, so you can hear we want this all to be balanced out. We want to add and bring some of the richness and depth back to it. We want to keep those highs from being too high and lows from being too low. We kind of want to even everything out. In other words, we're compressing that audio, that sound, and that's really what compression is at its heart. So in order to apply compression, the compression effect or filter, the first thing I want to do though is I want to select some audio. And there's different ways to do this in different applications. This is just the way that Logic does it. But you can basically set a point that you want it to repeat. And when I hit play, now it'll jump to the starting point and it'll play it through. And when it hits the end, it'll go back to the beginning again. So I asked the computer if it'd improve me. And if we were to jump to the end. So I asked the computer if it'd improve. Catch me if you can. Waiter. So I asked the computer if it'd. So that makes it much easier if you are sampling it. Obviously, you wouldn't in real life necessarily sample the entire track, right? You might just sample part of the track. That's going to show some of the different peaks and valleys in it here in the waveform. So I might just grab this bit of audio here. But you know, I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact... Okay, so that's the bit of audio that I'll be focusing on. And it really doesn't matter. You can focus on the different points. But so now let's actually apply our compression filter. And again, the way that you do this in a given application is going to be a little bit different. Depending on the application that you use. But here in Logic, right here, this little audio effects, you can see I've picked the compressor recently, but that can be found under dynamics, compressor, and of course mono, because the human voice is mono. I hope none of you are using stereo tracks for your audio. There is absolutely no reason to do that. The human voice is mono, so please don't do that. So this is the compressor effect or filter that Logic provides. Now there's a lot going on right here. It looks very complicated. There's a lot of dials and a lot of other things. It can be overwhelming. Don't worry. I'm going to explain all of this. And by the time I'm done, it's going to seem like old hat to you. No big deal. And again, the way that this particular compression tool looks is going to be different if you were looking at the one in Pro Tools or in video software editing, like in Premiere or even Sound Studio Pro, which is another wonderful audio editor. It all looks different, but they all have in common, all compressors all have in common a few things. The first one is threshold. The next is ratio. Some have makeup gain. Other ones just have output gain. But it doesn't matter. It has the same effect, really. Knee, attack, and release. You may not always see knee. That may be a built-in setting. It may not always be something that you can actually set, but that's okay. We'll talk a little bit about knee. But the main ones I want you to pay attention to are threshold, ratio, attack, and release. So before I spend too much time talking about this compression interface, I just want to go over compression a little bit really quickly. Like, what is compression? Well, compressors and limiters are used to reduce dynamic range. That is the span between the softest and the loudest sounds. And compression can make your track sound really good and really polished by controlling maximum levels and keeping what we call in the audio industry a higher average loudness. Okay, so in order to understand compression, you have to ask the question, well, why would you use compression? The goal is to result in a track that is more comfortable to listen to, that's easier to listen to. And it's something that the human ear can really identify when a track has that balance to it. But the problem is if you overcompress, you're almost going to like kill it. You're going to squeeze the life out of it. And not enough compression means that it's not going to have enough of an effect. It's not going to help it sound natural enough. So compression essentially is adding back a natural sound, keeping things balanced, making things better and easier to listen to without overdoing it. And I hear people overdoing compression all the time because they're really trying to sound like, I guess, a DJ on the radio, and that's not what you want. Now, there are some other things that the Logic compressor has that you don't want. For example, auto gain. You don't want auto gain. And you don't want this auto setting to be on. That should never be on. So turn that off. And so let's just dive right in. So first, let's talk a little bit about the threshold. The threshold is going to set the level where the compressor is actually engaged. So only when the audio level passes above that threshold will it get compressed. In other words, it has to be loud enough. I'm not talking about loudness in the audio term. I'm talking about volume. It has to be loud enough for the compressor to say, oh, that's too loud. I need to squash you down a little bit. So if you were to set the threshold at -5 or -10, only a signal whose peak is going to extend above that level will even get compressed. The rest of the time, no compression happens. So you want to set the threshold high, but not so high that it doesn't pick up any of the audio. I can hit the space bar or the play button and start listening to this audio, and then I can start making adjustments here while it's playing in the background. But let me just give you a really good starting point, some starting values that I want you to think about as you are editing or working with your own audio. The first is, I always recommend starting with a threshold of 0 when you're first listening to the audio. Always start with 0. And what you want to do is you want to play the audio, and what we're looking for is for the meter to bounce around sometime between -5 and -10. We don't really want it to go over -10 too much, and certainly not less than -5. If it bumps over -10 a little, that's okay. So let's play it and hear where we are with a threshold of 0, and then I will slowly begin to turn this up until I see it bouncing around in that area. So let's hear this.
But I just don't think I've ever...
See, the meter's not moving at all, right?
Interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I start being the real me, finally. But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that
So we're right here, somewhere around maybe 38. So that's a starting point. Now, we may need to adjust that threshold later, but for now, this sounds good. Now, the other settings that the other changes that we'll be making might affect that threshold. So the next thing I want to focus at is the ratio. Now, the ratio is probably the hardest to explain. It's very misunderstood, and there's a lot of math involved. But basically, what it does is it specifies the amount of volume reduction, or what we call attenuation, that's applied to the signal. And depending on the kind of compressor that you're using, really the ratio of 1-to-1 is the lowest. And that means no attenuation at all. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to send it right straight through. Compared to, the high end, 20-to-1, if your dial even goes that high, that's basically considered a limiter. That's just going to make sure that the signal never exceeds that threshold at all, and it's going to squash it down completely. Most of the time, you want a ratio setting for your compressor to be between 3 and 5, and I usually just put it at 4. 9 times out of 10, it's just good right there at 4. A lot of the time, I'll set it to 4, and it'll sound good right at 4. So let's listen.
I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will
So now as I'm doing this, I'll turn it way down so you can hear that.
Start being the real me, finally. But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course,
now you can hear at 1, we're not hearing that significant of a change. Let's move it all the way up to 30.
But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course,
So you can hear how it's almost muted at that point. Again, for spoken voice, spoken word, I think a 4-to-1 ratio. And by the way, you can double click that and just type. Pretty cool, huh? That'll get you to about, to about a 4. I generally think 4 is safe for almost all voices.
I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same.
So I'm liking the way that 4 sounds. You're going to have to play around with that, but rarely would you want to go below a 3 or over a 5. This is a safe zone for most people most of the time. Now, let's move on to the knee. The knee. So the knee refers to the way that the compressor transitions between non-compressed and compressed states of audio. This is very complicated, but typically, a lot of the time, the knee is just automatic, or they might give you just a choice between a soft knee and a hard knee. But if they give you a dial or a meter like this one, 1 is a soft knee and 0 is a hard knee. So that's kind of nice, but generally speaking, you want a soft knee, and a soft knee is going to allow for a smoother and more gradual compression. A hard knee is going to be kind of sudden. It's going to be extreme, and that's not what we want. We want as soft of a knee as possible, so we set it to 1. So let's start with a soft knee, and it's so subtle. See if you can even hear the difference.
But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I start being the real me finally. But I just don't.
Barely can tell a difference in this whole entire scale. 1 soft knee, go for that. Don't overthink it. Just go for it. Now, the attack and the release, super, super important. Now, the attack refers to the time that it's going to take for the signal that you're sending through it, your voice or a voice, to become completely compressed after it's exceeded the threshold level. So the audio is loud enough that the threshold is triggered and it says, I got to do something, but how fast do I do it? And of course, that also really depends on the audio itself. But generally speaking, a 5 millisecond attack, I want that to get in there and make that audio quiet right away. I don't even want the person to be able to hear it. If your attack time is too slow, the person will actually hear the audio get squashed down in some cases. That's not what you want.
I just don't.
So let's listen to the attack and see if we can tell a difference between a 0 and a 200.
That's the moment when I start being the real me finally. But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I start being the real me finally.
So it wasn't that easy to hear the attack. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and reposition this over something that has a little bit more going on in the audio and see if we can hear the silence and then an attack as it follows.
Nevertheless, also certainly true. I will say now, however, subjectively, human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently
tough to tell, right? That's just the nature of the human voice. So again, my recommendation for an attack is almost always 5. It gives you a 5 milliseconds for the compressor to kick in. That's pretty quick, but what it means is that you're not going to have that pump or that jump of audio where something comes out and really loud and then gets beaten back down. It's going to happen very quick. It's going to happen maybe even before anyone can notice that compressor is going to step in and start doing its job. Now, release is just as important as attack. It's the opposite of the attack. It's the time that it takes for the signal to go from compressed, if it was, to roll back into an uncompressed sound again. And again, this is very important because if it happens too quickly, and if there's some kind of background noise or something, you're going to hear that background noise get rolled off. You're going to hear the audio get rolled off, and it's going to happen too quickly, and it will sound abrupt. It will sound unnatural. So you really want to set a release time that's as short as you can, but without creating a pumping kind of effect. You'd notice that pumping effect a lot more in music than you will on a human voice, but I really recommend a release at about 50 milliseconds. Now, the release is a little bit more important when you have lots of people talking at the same time or you have audio that's changing. The release is how quickly it lets go and rolls off that sound, right? So again, the default of the release, 50 milliseconds, that is pretty standard. Sometimes if there is a lot of background noise, for example, if you can hear the person's air conditioning in the background or, wind is blowing or something like that, you might want to slow the release down so that those sounds get gradually turned off as opposed to suddenly turned off. And that can keep the person's audio from sounding abrupt, or, if there's that slight background noise, it rolls that off in a way that's much more pleasing to the ear as you listen. I'm going to change this. I'm going to start down at 5, and then I'll bump it up to 5K, and see if you can hear a difference.
However, subjectively, human teleportation, however, subjectively, human teleportation, however, subjectively. Human teleportation.
Not a big difference, right? And that's because there isn't a lot of background noise. I recorded that in the studio. So we'll leave that at about 50. That's a safe place for it. But if you remember back at the beginning of the video, I was saying we want to wind up at about -3. And as you may know, and as I've kind of explained, compression is compressing the sound. It's taking the gain or the volume out of the audio. And that's not what we want. We want to, if anything, we want things maybe to be even a little bit louder, right? So how do we do that? That's where makeup gain comes in. Now, in the case that your compressor doesn't have makeup gain, just like it might not have the knee, you can do the same thing with the output gain. There is a slight difference in the way these two things work. And if you have makeup gain, I suggest that you use the makeup gain if you have it. But our goal is to play this. And we, again, want to hear that the audio is hitting just about -3, anywhere between -6 and -3. I shoot for -3. So let me play this clip. And then you're going to be able to see, as I adjust the makeup gain, we're going to make that gain back up to about -3 after the compression.
But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I start being the real me. But I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieve what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I...
Okay, so we have wound up right at about 18.5, almost at 20. And that's pretty reasonable. The volume or the loudness here is going to depend, how much makeup gain you add, I should say, is going to be set by how loud the original track was. If somebody's talking on a condenser microphone and they're loud, they're going to have a much louder signal than somebody on a dynamic mic who's 3 feet away from it. It's going to sound different. So the amount of makeup gain you apply is going to vary, just like the amount of release that you apply to a track is going to be based on a number of different factors as well. So what we have here now, even in the part where it gets louder, the compressor should kick in and keep us at that -3, even over here where you know that I'm a bit louder. So let's see if that works.
I think I'm going to have a cannoli after all. Waiter, but what an accomplishment. What have I done, really? All I've really done is say to the world, let's go, move, catch me if you can.
Now you see that at that one point, it did peak out a little bit, okay? So if that's the situation, what we can do is we can turn the limiter on. And all we want to do for the limiter is leave all of these settings exactly the way that they are. But what we're basically doing is we are saying, if you wind up in a situation where something's going to jump up a little too loud, like it did at the very end there, just keep that from happening. Just don't let that happen. Okay, so let's listen to this again with the limiter on, and keep your eye on this meter.
What have I done, really? All I've really done is say to the world, let's go, move, catch me if you can. Waiter, what have I...
Now, it still did peak that one time, but I'm not so much worried about that. If I was, I would pull down just a little bit on that makeup gain. But typically, people aren't yelling. I was yelling a little bit of this, and I did it on purpose just to show that there are ways to get around that. You can use that limiter. You could also turn the attack down just a little bit to get it to pump a little faster. But for the sake of the overall audio quality, I'm not going to do that. And I'm pretty happy with how this sounds. So I'm going to take exactly what you see here. I'm going to bounce this out into a file that you can use. And then I want you to feel free to experiment with all of these same settings on your own. So have some fun with it. Feel free to play around. And that's it for this part of the video.
And there you have it. That's it. Hopefully this video has helped you understand more about compression. That's the whole goal. And I hope that having seen how I use compression, it will help you improve your own audio and the audio of your co-hosts and guests on your shows. And again, please like, subscribe,
ring the bell, and let me know in the comments what you think of this video. I'm working on a lot more for you, and I sure do appreciate you being here. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.